and welcome everybody. So first off, in this video I'm going to show a demo off of what I'm going to be talking about. So right here in these two spots I'm going to generate two spawners right next to each other, and then I'm going to have this piston push them, and so we're going to end up with two pig spawners right here and right here. So I have two render distance on right now, and I'll show you off kind of what I have set up here before I do it. So I'm going to go off over here, and then I'm going to mark those two chunks over there for repopulation, and then I'll be back in a second.
Okay, I'm back. So now I'm going to use this chain of pistons to populate those chunks in the order which I want them to over there. So I'm just going to break this redstone block. Okay, now the chunks were populated. Now let's go over and check them out. And as you can see, it worked perfectly. We got two pig spawners right next to each other here. And now I'm going to explain kind of how this process works. So first of all, we have spawner generation based on world population. So when this chunk right here gets populated, chunk C, in all the locations where these glass blocks are, a spawner can generate. And this is the actual spawner block. The parts of the dungeon can extend out a few more blocks, and basically so it's offset, and it's important to note that chunk C will only ever be populated when the chunk next to it here, off here, and right here are all simultaneously loaded for the first time. So yeah, this is kind of more well-known information, so in case you didn't know that, keep that in mind. So next I'm going to talk about what happens when a dungeon is being generated. So right here we have the most negative X and Z chord on this dungeon setup here, and it's also the highest Y value. So after it checks to make sure this is a valid location for generating a dungeon, it starts to iterate through the blocks inside of it, and it'll delete blocks that are like inside of the dungeon area. So if blocks are here, well, first of all, it goes kind of like this. It iterates, it starts at the highest Y level and this most negative X and Z chord, and it iterates through the Z's, and if it's a block it wants to delete, it'll delete it like this. It'll go like that, and through this line, and then the next line it'll go like that, and then it'll go through the rest of that line, and then it would delete this and this. It wouldn't delete this here because this is a wall block, and it also has a block below it. So a wall block would be deleted if it didn't have a block below it, but since this does, it doesn't get deleted. So it's important to keep that in mind. And okay, also spawners or dungeons can generate in a 7x7, a 9x9, a 7x9, or a 9x7. So what that means is that if a spawner was right here and it was 7x7, it wouldn't use this or this, but it would use all these as wall blocks. The ones I'm looking at, it wouldn't use these outer ones. It would also use the ceiling here, and it would use the floor. But so if it was like this here I'll show this. So if you had like two of these wall blocks like this, it would delete these two, but it wouldn't delete these two because it's not using those in its generation. And you could probably kind of imagine how it works for 9x7 or 7x9 also. And for 9x9, it would go ahead and delete all of these blocks like this, because it wouldn't use those, and they're inside of the dungeon. So yeah. So keep that in mind for a second. Yeah, also. So, like over here, I'm going to show, so this chunk, generates spawners over here. So, like you could have a spawner here, and they're right next to each other. They're actually inside the same chunk, but different chunks are generating those spawners. So, yeah, so basically the chunk back here would generate a spawner here, but this chunk wouldn't do that. It would only generate over here. So, I'm going to explain kind of what I'm doing over here now. So, when these chunks are marked for repopulation, and I send in this signal over here, we load this chunk, and we load this chunk with the pistons, and then we send this in here. You probably saw how the piston was at least. And this chunk underneath here is loaded. So, and also when that piston starts to retract, it checked for those blocks back here, and it checked all the way over here, and it was checking into this chunk, and when it checked into that chunk, it loaded that chunk, and these spawners, or first of all, this spawner right here got generated because this spawner is generated from this chunk directly under here. So when all these 4 chunks right here are loaded for the first time, that spawner got generated. So when this spawner was going through its process of generating, it was, like I said, deleting those blocks and stuff. And when it got to a block that was right here, we had a budded rail. So this rail was on even though it was in a budded state. So when this got deleted, it triggered all these rails over here, which were also budded, like immediately. This is block update instant, and then it triggered these budded rails all the way up to here. So this chunk got loaded first when this rail updated, and then this rail updated, and it's right next to this chunk, so this chunk got loaded. So at that exact moment is when this dungeon got generated. So also, so first, like before this finishes generating, like this dungeon finishes generating, this one will do its whole generation, because yeah, it's just kind of how world population works. So it does all that, it places the spawner here before this one gets placed, and before this spawner was generated, this dungeon deleted the block already where the spawner was before the spawner was placed. So when this finishes trying to generate, it's not going to try and delete this block again, which is kind of the most important part of this. So this wouldn't delete a spawner right next to it here, because it already tried to delete a block there. And when this spawner was generating, it already went through this spot here before the spawner was placed. When a spawner is generated, the spawner is placed after like all the blocks are deleted. So yeah, so that ends up being so we could have 2 spawners right next to each other in the case that they are generated from separate chunks. So what I did in this setup here was I just populated this first. This dungeon started to generate, then this one generated, did its whole generation, and then this one finished generating, and that placed the spawner there. And yeah, so we needed some special conditions for this to happen. Obviously, the game had to try and generate spawners in both these locations, or these 2 locations at least. And also we had to have a dungeon set up where when this dungeon starts generating, this dungeon didn't already like delete too many blocks where it would make this an invalid location. So we have to have a setup basically that has valid locations like that doesn't interfere with each other's locations. So with this concept, you could actually create a 4x4 spawner setup if you're on like a 4 chunk border, or at least a 4 chunk border, 4 chunk or 4 border where the spawners actually generate. So you could have 4 spawners right next to each other, and so using this, you could actually have a 2x2 area of pig spawners, created, and all those pig spawners are pushed by only a single piston. So this could be a potentially good way to create a poly pig spawner setup. Otherwise, you have to kind of have one piston for pushing each of the pig spawners. So yeah, like in this setup, I'm just using chunk repopulation and stuff. I'm just showing off this concept, but it is possible to like push in rails and have them be butted, or you could maybe even have like a redstone block in here that's powering these rails, and then gets deleted with the deletion of blocks, and then triggers rails that populate another chunk in the middle of a spawner generating. But yeah, so that's mostly the concept. Obviously, it doesn't have to be big spawners. You could just do regular spawners, but it might be a little bit more difficult to influence the spawner type because you might not have a lot of area to choose the spawner with the blocks underneath, because when a spawner generates, if there's no block below it, see if this iron block wasn't here, if that block wasn't there but there's a block here, then this block would get deleted, and if that got deleted before another spawner tried to generate, then that wouldn't work. So yeah, this spawner here was a 7 going this way and a 9 going this way. So I had blocks set up like this. So when this tried to generate, we had a 5 wide hole here. I don't know if I said this before, but you have to have a minimum of a 1 wide hole and a maximum of 5 wide. And so yeah, this was valid when this started generating, and then when this started generating, this one right here, it had a 5 wide hole here. This one's a 9x9, so yeah, so it was valid when both spawners started being generated. Yeah, so I think that's most of the information I wanted to go over.